I'm Karen Potter, your host of the Covenant Eyes podcast. Thank you for joining us today. We started this podcast because we know so many people, marriages and families are being impacted by pornography, and we want to help connect people to tools and resources that help them find lasting freedom.
Yeah, we sure do, Karen. I'm Brandon Clark. I'm a co-host here on the Covenant Eyes podcast. And if you're just tuning in for the first time, I just want to welcome you because this is a great opportunity to learn about resources and tools to not only help you live a better life, but to help protect your family, protect your marriage, being more intentional in the digital world. So we're very excited to have you on with us today. We have a fantastic guest who we'll introduce in just a minute. But first, Karen, we really want to hear from our listeners as we continue to grow this podcast.
We sure do. We want to hear from each and every one of you. So there's a couple ways that you can do that. You can send us an email at podcast@covenanteyes.com, or you can leave comments and feedback in YouTube channels or wherever you get your podcast, because we want to get your feedback. We also want to know if you have show topic ideas or guests you'd like to see us bring on the show. So don't forget that, send us an email, make sure you subscribe to the podcast.
Yeah, and we're very excited for today's topic and guest because it really speaks to the heart of what we do here at Covenant Eyes. So the topic today is accountability, the golden ticket to life. And our special guest is Davin Granroth, our very own president and chief operating officer here at Covenant Eyes. Davin has been working for Covenant Eyes for 14 years and has been in his current position for nearly 8 of those. He designs corporate strategy and structure, business models, vision, and culture, which has consistently led Covenant Eyes to be on the Inc. 5000 list 11 times since 2010. That's a remarkably rare feat. Davin has a passion for Covenant Eyes, as you'll see as we continue our conversation throughout the day today, to be a world class because of seeing the incredibly destructive effects that pornography has on lives and relationships going across many generations. So we're very excited to have Davin with us today. Karen.
Welcome, Davin. We're so glad to have you joining us. And today's topic really speaks to the heart of what we do here at Covenant Eyes. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic. You know, I've been with Covenant Eyes for, it's been over 5 years now. It's amazing. Time goes so fast. And I've traveled all over the country and talked to pastors and leaders. And, you know, it's amazing to me, but everyone agrees that accountability is biblical and it is the right path to take when addressing issues like pornography. But one of the most common things that I hear is that it's so hard and it's difficult and we don't always do it well. You know, for our audience, Davin, would you mind kind of walking us through kind of a good basic understanding of what accountability is and then kind of what its context is?
Yeah, absolutely. Brandon and Karen, thank you guys for having me here. I'm excited to be here and congratulate you on the podcast, and it's really getting rolling. I know you've got a few episodes already recorded, so it's a good initiative that we have. Accountability, I think, is one of these concepts that we hear in media, just in mass media all the time. And most of the time when I hear the word accountability, I end up thinking, oh, but that's not accountability. So if you think about, you know, any news program where some government agency or politician or something broke trust, right? They did something that the public, you know, somebody else is offended. You know, how dare they? And then, right, the next words are, they need to be held accountable, right? Like, oh, is that's accountability, right? And you know, and it causes me to think, well, we're an accountability company, and I'm like, is that the accountability that we're talking about? I'm like, no, not even close, right? That sounds more like a desire for justice, or even worse, vengeance, right? That sounds like an eye for an eye sort of a notion. I'm like, that's not the idea of accountability that actually works.
Absolutely not.
Right. I know you guys have heard it, and you guys can probably all, you know, I think all of our listeners can think of, oh yes. But right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. I really hope that we don't have customers who come to us, people who come to Covenant Eyes and think, I need that kind of accountability. You know, so-and-so's got it coming. Right? Like, no.
Let's hope not.
Right. Let's hope not. Right. So I think that's one of the problems that we run into is how do we, well, what is accountability then? If it isn't that, if it isn't some sense of justice or an eye for an eye, well, what is it, right? What does it actually require? And so we actually had a group of employees, I think it was Tom Landino, Aaron Stites, and John Parkinson, a number of years ago, did this sort of brain trust activity where they tried to define, okay, but what do we mean by accountability? And I thought it was brilliant. We haven't ever published it. I thought maybe we can, but I'm not gonna pull, heavily from that. But there was a few ideas that I think really work for our thoughts about accountability. And I would say that healthy, effective accountability requires a few things. It requires a person. So we're talking about pornography, people quitting pornography for good, right? That accountability has to include the person who wants to quit. So this is basics, right? The person who wants to quit, and ideally, that person initiates this, that they own it. There's a sense of ownership. I want to put this behind me. I'm committing to put this behind me. The second is a set of allies, at least one, but ideally a set of people who are coming alongside and saying, I'm with you. What? Like, what are we doing? But I'm with you, right? They might be surprised or taken back by it, but they're willing to help. They care about the person who wants to quit, right? They're willing to serve in that fashion. The third, and this is the part that so often is missed, the third is a clear commitment, a clear spoken commitment, at least to no longer seek out porn, and to talk with each other about it, right? And that absence of commitment, I think, is, I'll say the fourth. The fourth is a feedback system, right? The fourth is a feedback system that provides ongoing transparency, so that those allies, people who are coming to help the person who wants to quit, those allies can monitor and see how that person is doing according to their commitment. So, person who wants to change behavior, a set of people who are there to help, a commitment to actually make that change, and then a system of feedback, a system of monitoring to enable that to happen. And I think, back to that, we open sort of like, in mass media, somebody says they need to be held accountable. That sounds really dramatic, but I'm an executive in a company, and I believe this is true for any company. And I won't throw anybody under the bus, but I'm willing to bet that in any corporation, employees have run into the situation where somebody feels like, well, so-and-so is not pulling his or her weight. And they go to a manager and say, hey, so-and-so is not doing the job, right? And all of a sudden, we actually have a little tiny set of accountability scenario. And it's usually wrong, it's usually broken, because the complaining employee, here's what usually happens. I'm generalizing here, but here's what usually happens. That employee has a particular work ethic that they've committed to privately, and it's detailed. And they're assuming that other employees share the same work ethic, but they've never said it. And the other employee never agreed and said, yeah, totally, you can hold me accountable for your work ethic. Like, no, right? It's that secret commitment that's personalized, never shared. And then you accuse somebody and you call that holding somebody accountable, but it isn't. It's only accountable when there's that shared commitment, that spoken shared commitment, or written commitment even. So I just want to put that out there. What does healthy accountability look like? That it has to have those kinds of ingredients, or I don't think what you're actually doing is accountability. It's something else that's probably negative. It's probably not actually helping.
I think that's really great. Yeah, that's really great insight. Looking at the aspect of pornography, to get to the point you're talking about of wanting to get help, it takes a long time, and it's often a sad journey. I see it in my own journey, the point to get to where I actually was committed to making that step of bringing accountability into my life. And so it can be baffling, even for me who have gone through it, to see that pornography, even in its destructiveness, can suck us deeper, and we can fall deep into pornography use. And I guess I want to follow up to the accountability question, in that it takes a little bit to get to this point. Why do we see, Davin, why is it so hard for people to quit, and why do they fall deeper and deeper until a point where they're really like face down on the ground, realizing that they have nowhere else to turn?
Yeah, right. So, your story, I'm sure that you have perspective on this. Quite a few years back, I also went through my own journey struggling against pornography. And so I think for those people who have been through it or are going through it, my experience and my observations of other people who have been through it, there's at the heart of it, there's a couple of lies that people tell themselves. And I'm going to simplistically boil it down to two. I think there's two very, very common lies that a person has. And it might start, there's so many ways that a person might get exposed to pornography, not even necessarily seeking it out at first, but get exposed to it and then end up wanting to go back to it. And sometimes it's, months or years later, but they go back to it. They've got its hooks in them, and they want to eventually, for whatever reason, they end up turning back to it. When they turn back to it, they rationalize it, right? We have the power of rationalization to make horrible things seem acceptable. And there's two. The first one is that I'm in charge. I can quit anytime I want. Right? I can quit whenever I want. I'm just, this doesn't have a hold on me. I still have that ability to choose. And the second one is, well, it's not harming anybody. Right? Because if you can say I have the ability to quit whenever I want, and you believe that to be true, you can rationalize your way into an addiction, right? And before you realize it, you can't quit. And the second one, if you can tell yourself, you convince yourself in the moment that it's not actually hurting anybody, and why won't it hurt anybody? Well, because I'm keeping it secret. If they don't know about it, then it won't hurt anybody, and I'm still a good person, right? I'm not harming others. So for the three of us who have been in this industry, those two statements are patently wrong. It's like, come on. We have how much evidence to the contrary on both of those points? It's ridiculous. But in that moment, as a person who's rationalizing their behavior, a small step out of the norm, small divergence from what they would typically have as a virtuous life, or a life where they really have a reason to have integrity, it's easy to take those steps, right? And then you combine that shame or that secrecy, and you can tell that story, you can spin that shame or secrecy by saying, well, I'm not telling anybody because I want to protect them. And now somehow you're noble, right? In that, and I'm kind of laughing, right? You hear that sort of, I don't unintentionally chuckling about it, but it's that deep betrayal, that actually happens, and you can walk years telling yourself those two stories. And by the time the pain is so great, like you said, you're face down, and you realize, well, I've tried to quit 100 times, and I haven't. And you can no longer trust yourself. And you realize, at the very least, you've profoundly hurt yourself. It is hurting somebody. And probably you've hurt other people, whether you realize it or not. Just even without saying it, even if people aren't aware, you've probably damaged relationships. You probably pushed people away because you need to keep a secret. And other people are damaged because you're not with them, right? It's just, so it could get pretty, right? We just turned this podcast to someplace kind of dark and desperate. But that's, hey, this is our business, right?
It is. So. And Davin, you brought up, shame. It kind of perpetuates the cycle, right? We feel this shame and this guilt about our secret sin that we're struggling with, and then it just pushes us deeper and deeper into this. And I think one of the hardest parts about accountability, at least in my own experiences, has always been that vulnerability, because when you're ready to get accountability and do it well and do it right, you have to be vulnerable, and you're going to be opening yourself up and having to trust another human being with things about yourself that are not pretty and not things that you would want to take and share with the world. And so how do you think that vulnerability piece really plays into accountability? Because it's not something that we talk about frequently when we hear the word accountability, but I think it's an important piece to it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a hard one. The vulnerability, and Brandon, you talked a little bit about this. What does it take to get to the point where you're willing to be vulnerable? That you have to let go of protecting yourself, right? And I think there's a couple of things that are happening, Karen. That one is, there's a persecution that happens inside yourself, where you're accusing yourself. The story that you're telling yourself, that negative voice, you have reasons to be negative against yourself, right? You get, that you're not good enough, right? That there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of self-inflicted pain that goes on, regardless of anybody else who might find out who's upset about it. You realize that your sense of honor as a person has been damaged profoundly. And there's what is the opening of Beatitudes, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit, right? Poor in spirit, like when I think of somebody who's been struggling with an addiction and they're broken, and they're at that point where they're broken, that's a potential turning point in their life, in their spiritual life, as well as their whole life, right? Because they're poor in spirit, because blessed are the poor in spirit, because, right, their pride has been set aside. It can't stand in the brokenness of their spirit. And that happens, right, in a beautiful way to set them up for a path for healing, where they're willing to come vulnerably towards somebody that cares about them. And that's where trust and the sense of being loved by somebody else, the sense of having an ally, having a friend who can come alongside you and want the best for you, want the good for you, becomes so powerful, right? And that's, I really think that's part of that. Where does it come from? How can you get to that place? I think in the best scenarios, a person gets to that stage where they're on their knees and they're repentant, but they're understanding that they can't keep going on their own, that they need help, that they're so poor in spirit, they need somebody else. And I would argue, and probably our audience would agree, that God is right. God has that person. God cares for that person regardless, right? I think is a key detail. And something, I wish I had the verse that comes to mind here, but there's another element of this that says that, well, I'll share this story with you guys, that as I was going through it quite a few years back, there was this place I was in where you talk about isolating or separating oneself. I knew that I yearned for church. And so I would literally drive to a church of Mid-Michigan. I'd drive up to a church near Saginaw. And on a Sunday morning, and the willpower it took to get in the car that Sunday, get ready for church and drive to church was a big deal, right? And I get to the parking lot, and more than once, I got out of the car and I couldn't walk through the doors. I couldn't walk through the doors of that church. And nobody knows anything, right? Nobody knows the struggle, right? How poor in spirit was I, right? And inherent in that is a mistake that people who are struggling make. And that is to say that I am no longer acceptable to God because of the continuance of sin. I've tried to repent, I've tried to quit, and I haven't. I'm going back to it, right? So I'm no longer good enough for God's acceptance. What ego? Because before I was in that state, when I was maybe living a life of higher virtue, did that mean I had earned my place to be acceptable to God? No. And that's this other bit of the lie, that we have to justify ourselves to be good enough to be acceptable to God. And the answer is, you can't possibly. You can't possibly be good enough, no matter how good you are. That we're entirely dependent upon the love of God. And he accepts us regardless of how bad, or frankly, how good we think we are. We're wrong. God sees us for who we are, right? And that, right? So for anybody out there who might be listening, who might be able to identify with that, there's a deeper heart transformation that's ready to happen. And that is to let go of the sense of self, that the story, the lie that you tell about your own life, that there's something you can do to be good enough. You actually have to fully depend upon God's favor. And that, right, blessed are the poor in spirit, is the beginning of the journey of healing and that transformation. So, right, how do we help? I mean, so that leads to the, how do we help people get there, right? How do we help people get to that space for healing to take place? I think we do our part, I would say.
I love how you put that, because I think, we talked about in that destructiveness of pornography, there's really a beauty when we hit that moment of we realize we can't do it ourselves. And that's really, I think, where we come to encounter God in a real powerful way. And so as we talk about accountability in terms of pornography and breaking free, but really, Davin, that's just one step. We have accountability in so many different areas of our lives. And one of the reasons we titled the topic the way it is, accountability, the golden ticket to life, is because this isn't just about pornography. There should be a greater accountability pattern in our lives. I wonder if you can speak to that just a little bit.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about this topic in general for a long time, almost since I started here at Covenanteyes. And I think it's almost a hidden secret of our service is that when people use Covenanteyes well, over time, what happens is they forge deep friendships, deep relationships. And contrast that with people who are really struggling, have a tendency to have distanced themselves. And they might say, well, I don't have any deep friendships. Yeah, that may be true, right? That may be true. But part of the idea of Covenanteyes is to be vulnerable with people, to be willing to accept help and be willing to help others, right? And that's a deeper friendship that can lead to a deeper relationship with people around you. And there's something, and I guess part of it too is, if you think about it as a two-way street, you're in partnership with others. You're going through a journey with others. It's not being done to you. There might be a season where somebody's carrying you, right? There might be that season, but it has to be together. And you can develop a deeper virtue, right, through relationship with others. And we succeed better when we're in strong relationship. When we can help others, what a blessing, right? It is part of it. And I don't just mean the ally, but also the person who's trying to quit. There's unforeseen ways that friendship will become a strong, element. And so I think that it sounds simple. And it's not, at the end of it all, it's actually not about quitting porn, right? It's about a transformed life full of goodness in spite of the problems around us, right? In spite of that problem. How do we influence the world for the better? An element of this, again, through this transformation, I think there's a personal journey, and then there's a communal journey, right? That goes hand in hand with it. And the word trust, I think, is part of it. And for somebody who's struggling and this is the story of this season of their life is pornography. What comes with that is that it's hard to trust yourself. You've proven you're not trustworthy to yourself for a commitment that you would have. You're doing something you hate to do. So how can you trust yourself? Really, deep down inside, how can you trust yourself as a man or a woman, as a spouse or a parent, as an employee or a boss, as a citizen, right? There's such a deep problem of integrity that a person has. And to have somebody go through this journey of accountability with pornography reteaches us that we can hold our inner commitments. We can make a commitment and honor it. And that's a lesson that we didn't believe about ourselves before, right? And so, wow, that should be massively confidence building, right? Over time, as you realize, right, you're part of that, we talk about a transformation journey. The transformation journey is you realize you can be trustworthy. And if you can be trustworthy, then you're on a pattern for massive growth.
Absolutely.
Others can trust you, right? Yes. So I think that's that golden ticket for life. It's training wheels in a way, like we can provide for people who have broken their trust in themselves, evidence that they can regain that integrity, they can regain a pattern of being trustworthy. How do you lead? How do you lead if you don't have that, right?
And you bring up a really good point too, because I think it's interesting that at Covenant Eyes, like our mission, our promise is to help people, live lives full of integrity and have these restored relationships with their friends and family and God, and it's intrinsically built into everything we do here. And I love how you talk about that reestablishing of trust, because, I think something that's important for our listeners is that that's a process. It takes time, to reestablish that integrity within ourselves and to live up to our own promises to ourselves and to others. It takes time and it's a journey. And I think part of that, that's why Covenant Eyes is with you on that journey. We're part of that journey because it is a long haul. And I'd just like to point that out because I think that was a really strong point that you mentioned.
Absolutely.
Another, oh, go ahead, Brandon. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, Karen, you brought up Covenant Eyes and the promise we make. I wonder, David, can you just speak a little bit about the mission of Covenant Eyes and how we really do seek to be world class, not because we want to be great, but because we have a heart for the people that we serve and we truly want what's best for them, including ultimately that united relationship with God.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's such a deep, I think about pornography and there was a book I read a number of years ago, sort of a booklet by a guy named John Kolko on wicked problems. And I read it and I thought, yeah, pornography is a wicked problem. It's like a hydra. It has so many heads, right? Economically, personally, socially, right? From an addiction perspective, it's such a difficult issue to face because it's so massive. And I would say that, pornography use lands in the realm of sexual brokenness, right? And that's not new, right? This is an age-old, it's a human problem, right? This is a very human scale problem. But what happened is over the last, 50 years with technology and really over the last maybe 20 years with the internet and mobile devices, that I just think that the availability of pornography it's hard to put a number on it, but it's absolutely exploded. It's absolutely exploded around the world in use. And I think an analogy would be like, people have, like issues with food. Like I go to McDonald's and I get a Big Mac, right? Why? Because it has sodium and fat in it. My body is craving these things, right? That's why. And then I want to drink more of the Coke, right? Because it's, I'm thirsty because right? They're hyper stimulants. Like these are, they're wired for our bodies to just consume this. Is it healthy? By all means, no, right? And I think pornography has a similar effect on our sexual wiring, right? And it does lead to this sort of massive addiction with all the issues that we talked about before of secrecy and shame. So I would pose that there's so much pain in the world. It leads to broken people. It leads to broken people, but those broken people lead to broken families, broken relationships, broken faith, right? I think untended, this issue, I think that I would pose that the journey of the church itself, of the faithful, is at risk. Just like I said earlier, I drove to church and couldn't go in the doors. Okay, well, eventually I did, but play that out for how many people walk away and never walk into a church again, right? That's an invisible loss, right? The pastor didn't see that because the person wasn't there, right? It's easy to miss what was never there in the first place, and I think that's just millions of people who are not living a full life, who are not engaging in their faith communities and their whole communities in healthy ways. And I know that we've all heard stories or maybe been, associated in families that have brokenness, physical abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse that carries from a grandparent to a parent to a child, right? And that generational impact is absolutely devastating. It's absolutely it's heartrending. I mean, and especially for people who are in the thick of it. So when we talk about the impact of pornography on the world, it's pretty easy for me to see that outcome, that brokenness towards abuse, right? And how many millions of families are experiencing that in some way or will as pornography use continues. And there is a causal connection, right? There absolutely is. By continuing to watch pornography, continue to consume pornography, we train ourselves to objectify people, and we fail to see them in a compassionate way as a human being. It just does, and we're sensitized towards violence. What a curse, what a curse. So I take heart in those times when I think, how many families, because somebody in that family used covenanteyes and was able to put that generational history to death, right? And their grandchildren will live in a house of peace and love. That's what it's marked by, is peace and love. Healthy, whole house, right? Full of love and laughter.
So good.
Right? That's the benefit of somebody in this generational line making a choice to stop that curse. Right? And right, how many,
Yeah.
right? Thousands and thousands and thousands, right? How many millions of people can be impacted by this? So I think that when I think of what is the mission of Covenanteyes, there's a lot to be said, but that might be a way to visualize it, to say, what are we here for? We're here to stop a curse upon humanity and to partner with people who are willing to become, right, take a stand and go through that journey of healing and transformation, not just for themselves, but blow it out to your lifetime, blow it out to your whole family's lifetime. What kind of beautiful influence can follow what is certainly a challenging journey, but boy, is it worth it. And I wish people could see if people could see the beautiful outcome, the beautiful impact, the generations later, who wouldn't choose to quit? Right? Who wouldn't choose to quit? Absolutely, everybody would. Yes. So I think that's at the heart of our mission, is that we're at a historical time because of where the internet has taken us and pornography has taken us. And as humanity, we do not have wisdom in this, but we're in the place of forging that wisdom about how to live a better life and how to have healthier families in regard to technology, particularly about pornography.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, Davin, that was so great. And, that's one of the reasons I absolutely love being a part of the mission here, because really we are helping people create a legacy and change the course of, their family's history, or, their futures.
Absolutely.
It's an amazing mission that we're on here. And I want to leave our listeners, on a positive note that, Covenanteyes is here to support you. We are a resource and a tool to this journey to freedom from pornography. We also foster that deep accountability relationship. I mean, that is the heart and soul of our software. It is about connecting you with other people who will walk with you, that Barnabas, that Timothy, and that Paul kind of relationship. And I want to encourage everyone out there, if you're listening and you're struggling with pornography and you're not sure what to do, Covenanteyes is here to help you. We have a customer support line. Please give us a call. We'll help connect you with tools and resources. Our software is an amazing step in the right direction to getting that accountability in place for your life. So I just want to reach out to everyone out there. I know that somebody's listening and needed to hear this message today from Davin. And Davin, gosh, that was so powerful and amazing. Thank you for sharing.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure to talk with both of you today. Thank you.
Yeah, Davin, thanks so much. And if you are listening and you have been inspired as well, I really want to encourage you to spread the word. The way we get this message out far and wide is you spreading the word, sharing the podcast, subscribing to the podcast, leaving reviews so other people can see what you've listened to. It all starts with you. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and be sure to drop us a note if you have been inspired, if Covenant Eyes has touched your life and helped you reclaim your life and reclaim your family and the legacy of your family. Let us know by sending us an email at podcast@covenanteyes.com. That's podcast@covenanteyes.com. We love to hear stories. We get to see them and hear about them all the time, and we want to hear what yours is as well.
Absolutely. And with that, we do want to close today's podcast with just a quick reminder that if you are ready to take that next step in the journey to freedom, we do have a free 30-day trial of Covenant Eyes available to our podcast listeners only. If you go to covenanteyes.com and in checkout, enter the promo code free podcast. That's free podcast. You'll get a free 30-day trial of Covenant Eyes so you can start to experience the journey to freedom. And again, from everyone here at Covenant Eyes, thank you so much for joining us for today's podcast, and we'll see you next time.